The average NFLer is only in the league for a little over 3 years. So what does that mean for the average spring leaguer? They'd be lucky if the league lasts long enough for them to have one. There's no better example of this fragility than the Alliance of American Football. It's been 6 years since the league burned like a supernova. Being well past the average 3.3-year length, we can see who stood the test of time and find themselves on an active NFL roster today. There were plenty of interesting names that came and went in a who's who of football memedom. Trent Richardson's one-yard runs, Christian Hackenberg's infamous flameout, the high-profile return of Johnny Football. But there were plenty of others eager for the opportunity. The likes of Garrett Gilbert, who had managed to start several games in the NFL after his experience in Orlando. Greg Ward, who caught 53 passes for the Eagles in 2020 and is still hanging on in the UFL. And Mike Purcell, who played 4 seasons with Denver after his AAF stint before retiring this past January. Out of 205 players in the league, 63 found homes by the start of NFL training camps in 2019. Out of those men, only a handful remain on an NFL roster or practice squad as of 2024. It's only fair for these survivors to get the credit they deserve. Logan Woodside was drafted by the Cincinnati Bengals in the 7th round in 2018. The Toledo Rockets alum didn't last long with the Bengals being waived during final roster cuts. After looking for opportunities, as well as a suspension by the NFL itself, he was drafted by the San Antonio Commanders.
San Antonio selects Logan Woodside.
He didn't have the numbers of a Garrett Gilbert, but he did win AAF Player of the Week in Week 5. But that's all he'd get. The league shut down and he'd find work with Tennessee. Following the AAF, Jake would bounce around as a clipboard holder and get limited playing time with the Titans, Falcons, and now, ironically, back with the Bengals as their third-string QB. How much longer can he last? Who the hell knows, but keeping a paycheck and securing a pension is always impressive. D'Ernest Johnson has undoubtedly had some of the most success in the NFL following the AAF. After not being drafted, Johnson made the decision to fuck off to Key West for the rest of the 2018 season to spend his days fishing for mahi-mahi. And undoubtedly partaking and enjoying Florida's forever replenishing supply of single retirees in their golden years. Come 2019, the Orlando Apollos came a-knockin', to which D'Ernest might have to thank for his career. Being on the best team in the short-lived league, Johnson had the advantage of having a spotlight on him and his production as a runner. After 8 games with the Apollos, Johnson would get an invite to Browns training camp. Impressing coaches with his run and pass-catching ability, Johnson made Cleveland's roster to start the season. He'd stay on as a depth piece for a few years, but in October of 2021, his talents as an Apollo would come to the light. He made his first regular season NFL start, subbing in for an injured Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt. Johnson amassed 146 yards on 22 carries and a touchdown, winning the FedEx Ground Player of the Week in the process. After a limited 2022 with Cleveland, D'Ernest would sign with Jacksonville, where he played his last 2 campaigns. It's not the most glamorous career, but he's been able to hold his own at a position that is very unforgiving to age. It's a good story to tell. Daniel Brunskill was an undrafted prospect scooped up by the Atlanta Falcons in early 2017. And after a year on the practice squad, Daniel signed on board the San Diego Fleet to get a chance at creating more film for NFL scouts. I think it might have worked. It grabbed the attention of the 49ers, who'd retained Brunskill for 3 seasons. He eventually earned a modest payday, signing with Tennessee on a 2-year, $5.5 million contract to be quality O-line depth. Currently, Daniel stepped in to be the starting center for the Titans in 2024 following an injury to Lloyd Cushenberry. He's not a full-time starter, but versatile linemen always have a role in the league. Elijah Campbell played his 4 years of college ball for 3 schools as a safety, but it wouldn't be enough for him to get drafted in 2018. He'd then be scooped up at the Browns' competing camp, but he wouldn't make the final round of roster cuts. Sitting out all of that year, Elijah then took the opportunity to join the Birmingham Iron, playing all 8 games of their ill-fated season. Campbell would then follow this up by joining the DC Defenders in XFL 2.0. Bad luck followed him there. However, his time with the 2 Spring Lakes managed to earn a spot on the Jets practice squad during the 2020 season. He was even elevated to the 53-man roster for a game. And although Campbell was waived the following August, he was quickly swiped off it by the Miami Dolphins, who've re-signed Campbell twice since. And he remains on the team's roster to this day. He survives as both a backup secondary player and special teamer. Not a world beater, but someone that fills a role. Teams always need those guys. Coming out of Georgia Southern, Younghoe Koo had an 88% success rate on kicks. Like most kickers, he wasn't drafted, instead signing with the uprooted San Diego Chargers. This made Koo the 4th South Korean player born in the NFL. Although he was able to beat out veteran Josh Lambo, Koo fell victim to the San Diego curse. Kickers don't do well there. He'd get cut in very short order. Koo would go on to sign with the Atlanta Legends of the Alliance, scoring the first points in AAF history with a 38-yard field goal against Orlando. Koo would go on to have great success in the Alliance, and at the time of collapse was a perfect 14 for 14 on field goals for the season. Despite his success, several teams would pass on signing Koo. Until finally, in October 2019, the Patriots signed him to their practice squad as insurance for Stephen Gostkowski. He lasted 11 days. He'd only be unemployed for a week. Koo signed with the Atlanta Falcons after a shaky start from Matt Bryant, their franchise's leading scorer. In his first game as a Falcon, Koo would go a perfect 4 for 4 and never look back. The very next season, Younghoe led the entire league with 37 field goals made and 144 total points scored in the year. He'd go on to sign a 5-year extension in 2022 and continues with Atlanta to this very day. He had a sluggish 2024, but is still seen as one of the more reliable kickers in the NFL. It's a confidence game, and Younghoe has to thank the AAF for that. Nick is a folk hero around the NFL, playing on 6 teams' rosters starting with the Cowboys in 2007. He'd spent 6 years with the Jets and had a particularly legendary year with the Bucs in 2017. Legendary in the meme world, I mean. He probably kicked his release papers wide. This led Nick to try and rejuvenate his career with the Arizona Hotshots, just a day after the Bears had him in for a tryout to replace Cody Parkey. You just wonder why Chicago brought him in. Being undeterred, Folk will go on to set the AAF record for longest field goal at 55 yards before the league ceased operations. His performances were enough to earn him a roster spot on the New England Patriots through the 2022 season. He was far more reliable there than his Bucs days. After a rebuild commenced, he'd be traded to the Tennessee Titans, where he currently kicks on Sundays. The Titans may be terrible, but Folk isn't a reason for that. Notably making all 7 field goals, 3 over 50 yards and a blowout against Miami, earning him AFC Special Teams Player of the Week. The only downside, he's going to be 41 at the start of next season. He might not have much time left in the league. Most long snappers don't get drafted into the NFL, even if you did go to Notre Dame. He joined the Cowboys for camp, but didn't survive the final round of cuts in 2018. The senior Scott would sign with San Antonio, snapping balls to his heart's content until the league ceased operations. Thereafter, Daly would ascend to the lofty heights of the XFL's New York Guardians. At least until that league shut down. After years of trying, Daly would finally secure a role in the NFL with the Lions, usurping 17-year veteran Don Muhlbach. He'd hold the job until 2024, where he'd be Muhlbach himself for a younger, cheaper option. That same week, Chicago fulfilled the NFC North tradition by swiping him up to the practice squad. After injuries, he'd be promoted to the active roster where he currently resides as a player. The long snapper life. John Timu, our final entry, was assigned to the Chicago Bears in 2015 as an undrafted free agent. For the Bears, he'd pivot between the practice squad and 53-man roster in case of team injuries. But in late 2018, he'd be released. Like many eager for opportunity, Timu signed up for AAF conscription in March 2019. Give or take 20 days before the league would financially fold. It's at this point John traded in his shoulder pads and helmet for a whistle and windbreaker coaching at his alma mater, the University of Washington. After 2 years as a graduate assistant, John would be hired by the LA Chargers as an assistant coach. He'd slowly work his way up the ranks until 2023, when John would become the assistant defensive line coach for the Chargers. This leads to his current occupation, as a defensive assistant for the Atlanta Falcons. He's not on a 53-man roster, but it still counts. Although the AAF couldn't even survive a year, one thing I took note when going through these players' careers was how often their tenures were sandwiched between stints in the NFL. The Alliance often provided a chance to play in a lower-stakes league for scouting tape and highlight reels. After years of stumbling, we eventually would get a stable spring football product in the UFL. Hopefully stable. But this list goes to show the story of the Almighty Shield can be guided and shaped by those overlooked or given a second chance. But me? I'm just a fan of watching things burn to the ground.
Founder and CEO, Charlie Ebersol.
Good morning. Thank you for coming. For the last year, in secret, we've been building a new football league.